Hello and welcome to CAIE Science Unit 2 for 5th grade, the life cycle of flowering plants. So the topics we're going to be looking at today. First of all, we're going to be looking at the vocabulary. Then we're going to move on to why plants have flowers. If you look at your Cambridge Primary Science book, that's Unit 2.1. Thirdly, how seeds are spread, seed dispersal, that's Units 2.2 and 2.3. 4. The parts of a flower, which is Unit 2.4. 5. Pollination, Units 2.5 and 2.6. Number 6. And the final topic is plant life cycles, that's Unit 2.7. So let's start with looking at the vocabulary. In this part of the video, we will revise the main vocabulary words introduced in this topic. You will see the English word, the meaning of the word, a sentence using the word, and a picture. So let's start. Scent. If you look at the picture, it's like another word would be for smell, meaning the smell that flower petals give out. Sentence. The scent of the flowers is beautiful. Wither. Ooh, this leaf doesn't look very good. Meaning to dry out and start to die. Sentence. The plant withers without water. Reproduce. You can see we've got a flower and we've got a bee. Meaning to form young, to make young. In this case, we're making new flowers or young seeds. Sentence. Plants reproduce to make new plants. Seed dispersal. Another word for that is travel. How do they move? How do seeds go from one place to another? Meaning, when seeds are spread away from the plant where they formed. Sentence. Seed dispersal can be done by different ways, and we'll look at that later on in the video. Seedlings. Very small, very young, meaning the new plant that grows from a germinated seed. Sentence. The seedlings need to grow to become a plant. Spongy. Well, this is a sponge, meaning like a sponge with lots of holes in it that can be filled with air or water. Sentence. It feels spongy and soft. Explode. Meaning to burst open with a lot of force. Sentence. The plant exploded and the seeds came out. Sepals. Meaning the outer ring of a small green leaves on the base of a flower. Here are the sepals. The sepal protects the bud. The bud is the very young flower. Carpel. Meaning the female part of a flower. Sentence. A carpel is part of a flower. Pollen. Here is the pollen. Meaning yellow or brown powder made in the stamen. Sentence. Bees like pollen. Stigma. Meaning tip of the carpel. So this is your stigma. Sentence. The stigma gets the pollen. Stamen. The male part of a flower. Sentence: the stamen makes the pollen. Ovary, meaning part of a plant that contains eggs. Sentence: some flowers have more than one ovary. Anther, meaning the tip of the stamen. Sentence: the anther contains the pollen. Pollination, the butterfly is going from one flower to another flower, meaning the process that brings pollen from the stamen to the stigma of a flower. Sentence: pollination happens between two flowers. Nectar, meaning a sweet liquid that flowers make. Sentence: the bee gets the nectar from the flower. Fertilization, meaning the process that joins the pollen and the eggs to make seeds. Sentence: a new seed is made when it is fertilized. Life cycle, meaning the different stages in a plant's life from when it grows from a seed until it makes its own seeds. Sentence: every plant has a life cycle. So let's go into part 2, why plants have flowers. In your learner's book, that would be looking at unit 2.1. And the main points are: most plants have flowers. There are many different kinds of flowers. Flowers form fruits. Flowers help plants to reproduce. So, there are lots of types of flowers. Some of them are big, for example the sunflower, or the hibiscus, or the lily. Some plants are small, for example baby's breath, forget-me-not, globe amaranth. Some flowers are colourful, the lotus flower, the gerbera, and the primrose. Some flowers are fragrant, that means they've got a really nice smell. Roses, sweet pea, freesia. So, part 3, how seeds are spread, units 2.2 and 2.3 in your learner's book. A fruit protects the seeds inside and helps to spread the seeds. Seeds must be dispersed, that means to be spread, so they have enough space, water and light to grow. Animals disperse seeds on their fur by burying them or eating them. Wind disperses seeds that are light and dry. Water disperses seeds. And some seeds explode. So let's look at these more in detail. First of all, why seeds must be dispersed. It's very important for the plants to keep on living. If plants grow too closely together, they have to compete for the light, water and food. Seed dispersal allows plants to spread out over a wide area. So the main parts are: you can disperse by wind, by water, by animals and by explosion. So let's look at those in more detail. Dispersal by animals. So the animals and birds eat the fruit. They eat the juicy bits, but the seeds or the pips can't be digested. So after digestion, after they've eaten it, they go to the toilet, of course. And they've moved from one place to another. When they go to the toilet, the seed comes out. Squirrels collect nuts like acorns and bury them for winter food. but sometimes they forget where they've buried them. And these grow into new trees. Some fruits, like that of the burdock plant, they have seeds with hooks. The animal walks past them. The seeds catch on the fur of the animals and are carried away. Dispersal by wind. Some seeds are carried to a new place by the wind. These seeds are very light, because if they're too heavy, the wind can't pick them up. The seeds of the orchid are almost as fine as dust. The seeds of the dandelion are carried by the wind. They're carried to another place where they will drop when the wind stops, and they will grow into new plants. Dispersal by water. The water lily and the coconut palm are carried by water. Coconuts can travel for thousands of kilometres across seas and oceans. The original coconut palms on South Sea Islands grew from fruits which were carried there from the mainland by ocean currents. Dispersal by explosion. Some plants have pods that explode when ripe and shoot out the seeds. Lupins, gorse and broom scatter their seeds in this way. Pea and bean plants also keep their seeds in a pod. When the seeds are ripe and the pod has dried, the pod bursts open and the peas and beans are scattered everywhere. Part 4. The parts of a flower. Unit 2.4. Flowers have 4 main parts. Green sepals protect the flower bud. Coloured petals attract insects. Male stamens make pollen. The female ovary and carpel contain eggs. So let's have a look at the parts of flowers. Here we're just going to name them, then we'll go into more detail. We've got the petal, the stigma, the anther, the stamen, the filament. The stamen is the anther and the filament together. The ovary and the sepals. So the petals. Well, the petal attracts insects to visit the flower. So insects are going to go to petals that are colourful, that smell nice. The colours that we see in the flower petals are quite different to those seen by insects with their special eyes. Stigma. The stigma gets the pollen from visiting insects. It is one of the female parts of a flower. The others are the style and the ovary. Anther. The anther is one of the male parts of a flower. The shape and size of the anther will attract the correct insects. Filament. The filament is also one of the main male parts of a flower. The filament holds up the antler, so it's like the trunk or the stem. The stamen. The stamen is the male part of a flower, made up of 2 parts, the anther and the filament. Ovary. The ovary is located at the base of the flower. The 3 female parts of a flower are together called the pistil or the carpel. The female parts of a flower make the seeds. Sepals. The sepal is usually green. It's the part of the flower that protects the bud. The bud is the baby flower. It's not part of the pollination process. So let's move on to pollination. What is pollination? Units 2.5 and 2.6. Pollination brings pollen from the stamen to the stigma of the same kind of flower. So it will go from a lily to a lily, or a rose to a rose. Flowers pollinated by insects have coloured, scented petals and nectar. Remember, scented smells nice. Flowers pollinated by the wind have little colour, no petals or scent, and lots of pollen. Fertilization happens when the pollen and eggs join inside the ovary. Different insects pollinate different kinds of flowers. Bees, butterflies, beetles and wasps are some of the insects that pollinate flowers. So let's have a look at pollination. In order to produce a new plant, many flowering plants need to be pollinated. Here you can see a bee with lots of pollen on it. This means that pollen produced by the stamen needs to get to the stigma. Many plants cannot be pollinated by their own pollen. The pollen must land on another plant of the same type. Insects pollinate many flowering plants. The flower attracts the insect by using its colours and smells. The insect arrives at a flower to collect the nectar, which is a sweet liquid. While the insect is collecting the nectar, the male parts of the flower brush the insect with pollen. The insect then travels to another flower, where the pollen brushes off onto the female parts of that flower. If the pollen is from the same type of flower, then it pollinates the visited flower. Fertilization. The pollen from the first flower sticks to the sticky stigma. Part of the pollen, called the male cell, travels down the style. The male cell then enters the ovary. Within the ovary, the male cell joins with the ovule. The plant has now been fertilized. After fertilization, the seeds start to grow. Last part, plant life cycles, which is unit 2.7. The plant starts life as a seed. It germinates and grows into a plant. The adult plant produces flowers, which are pollinated and fertilized to produce seeds in a fruit or seed pod. The seeds are dispersed and germinate to produce new plants. So, part 1 of the life cycle is the seed. The life cycle begins when the seed is planted in the ground. 2. Growth and germination. The seed needs certain things to be able to start growing. Sunshine, water, air and nutrients or food. We looked at this in the first video, Unit 1 video. So you've got the sun, water, air and food. When the seed has had enough of these things, it sprouts and starts to grow. We call this germination. 3. Pollination and fertilization. Insects such as bees pick pollen upon their legs and bodies while collecting nectar from a flower. They then leave this pollen behind on new plants. When the bee has left some pollen behind, the pollen joins up with the baby seeds in the plant. When they join together, this is called fertilization. And the last part, seed dispersal. Before it can grow on its own, the new seed needs to move away from the mother plant. This can happen in lots of ways, by wind, by water, or via birds and other animals. So, thanks for watching video number 2. Come back later for video number 3. Bye for now.